In the wilds of Papua New Guinea, Professor Brett Nyland is on a microscopic medicine hunt. Brett and his team are searching the medicine cabinets of some of the oldest cultures in the world to find potential life-saving drugs and make their production sustainable.
If you find a new drug in a plant, what often happens is that plant is harvested or chopped down and it's all taken away. And what will happen is that drug in that plant will be gone forever.
Working with local scientists as well as bush doctors and healers, Brett's work involves isolating specific medicinal plants and then searching for bioactive or useful medicinal compounds.
And our particular process is that we look for the fungus and the bacteria that live in the plant, because I guess one of our major theories is that the drugs are not produced by the plant itself, they're produced by things that live in the plant, and these are called endophytes.
Once these endophytes are identified, the bacteria and fungus that produce them can be cloned, providing an infinite supply of the required drug with no need to harvest them from nature. Papua New Guinea is the perfect place for research like Brett's, with a diverse culture, a rich tradition in bush medicine, and some of the most biodiverse ecosystems on the planet.
For a scientist, it's like Ferdinand Magellan sailing around the planet going bang, or new country. You can't help but discover things in a place like PNG.
But discoveries are also being made closer to home. Back in Sydney, PhD student Kristen Miller is applying Brett's techniques to Chinese medicines and finding that though many of the compounds she's hunting are new to science, they're often ancient history to nature.
Finding the reason behind why traditional medicines are used is something exciting. It's like validating the traditional medicine that has been used for 2 centuries.
Some of the oldest traditional medicine is that of Indigenous Australia. On the outskirts of suburban Sydney, Brett's PhD student Shane Ingri is studying plants that have been used for millennia, but are only now being understood.
So this is a leptospermum species, or coastal tea tree. This was used for, you could boil these types of leaves up or heat them up in a water and use it as a wash for any kind of infection or like a wound opening or whatnot. So I'm just going to take a section of the stem back and some leaves back to work on in the lab. Well, I've always found that it's a good way to mix like my traditional and cultural learnings in with sort of modern day science, and it's a good way to, one, get people interested in science, especially from the Indigenous communities, and also to look at our Indigenous plants, which a lot of people think are just, the medicine plants are just, hoodoo. But it's good that you can take this back to the lab and prove that it was actually, like there were medicinal properties, and finding that they can cure certain diseases that are still around today.
All around the world, traditional medicinal plants, as well as modern plant-based medicines, are in constant demand. If we're to balance the health of humanity with the health of the environment, then developing new science like this is critical.
Having our hands on the technology we do have, and then coupling that with tens of thousands of year-old knowledge, it's all like, it all fits together perfectly. It's like, why ignore this stuff? There's millions of drugs out there waiting to be discovered.
Hi, I'm Michelle Pisani. I'm at the Australian Defence Force Academy at ADFA in Canberra. I am studying the effects of cancer treatment and how to improve cancer drugs to reduce the side effects of cancer treatment. I've always really loved science and had an aptitude for it since a young child. So when I got the offer to move into chemistry from my biology background, I took it. First of all, I got the scholarship in Canberra, which was a big help. But the facilities at ADFA are great. It's a beautiful campus, but I've also got access to main campus facilities, or the analytical centre that's here, and that's a real help to the research and will hopefully help it progress. It's rewarding to go to work in the morning and to know that even in some small way, I mean, you might not change the world, but you may contribute something that someone else may be able to use.
You look at it, people want to get computers that work faster and faster. They want to spend less time surfing the internet. They want to solve problems that they just can't do. They want more graphics. So whatever's happening internationally in the world of silicon chips, they are getting smaller every year, and that's actually driven by the market. The market wants things smaller, they want things faster.
In computers, size matters. We're rapidly approaching the time when we can't physically fit any more transistors onto a silicon chip. So the next big thing in computers is very small, implanting single atoms instead of transistors. And UNSW is one of the world's leading quantum computing research groups.
And it's been theoretically predicted many years ago. If you could make a computer that worked in the quantum regime, you would be able to solve problems you just can't do with classical computers. If you look traditionally, we've had what's called the digital era, where information is stored in essentially one or two states, and it's essentially a charge state. It's either 1 or 0, on or off. And everything we see around us, all the computers we use, work in the classical regime. And by going to a quantum system, you can start to encode information not just in the 1 or 0, the magnitude, but you can put it on the spin. And the spin can contain a lot more information. And so the rationale for going to looking at a single spin is that you can use the quantum properties of that spin to put basically more information and be able to entangle these spins together. And the idea really being that if you can control it at the quantum level, you'll be able to get this kind of exponential speed up in computational power.
An atom, surrounded by its electron cloud, works right at the edge of what we know about physics. The electron has a spin, the angular momentum of its magnetic field. You can describe that spin as spin up or spin down, so measuring it, you could say it holds 2 bits of information, just like a transistor. But it can also be up and down, or somewhere in the middle, all at the same time. And that's the weird world of the quantum bit, or qubit, the basic building block of a quantum computer.
First of all, you've got to create the single atom device, and the technology to do that just didn't exist 10 years ago. How do you put a single atom in silicon? How do you encapsulate it so it's in a crystalline environment, so it's still within the semiconductor host material? And then how do you actually put wires down to connect to that single atom so that you can control that single atom? To manipulate atoms, you have to be inside a microscope, such as the one behind me, and that works in an ultra-high vacuum environment. So it's a big piece of stainless steel with no air, anything inside, so it's a vacuum. And in that vacuum environment, you can manipulate the atoms. And that literally uses a very fine metal tip. And that metal tip, you actually move it across the surface of a crystal. So you see the atoms on the surface, and you literally move that metal tip across, and as it goes over the atom, it deflects. And what you're doing is you're measuring a current and keeping it constant. And as it deflects, you're measuring that small change in current as it goes up in height. And so with such a technique, you've been able to image the atoms on the surface. And then by applying pulse voltages to the tip at certain points, you can actually change the chemistry of the surface. And typically what we do on the silicon surface is we take a silicon surface, nice and clean, and we put down one layer of hydrogen atoms. So it just literally has a silicon-hydrogen bond. And then with the STM technique, we can apply a voltage to the tip just above that silicon-hydrogen bond and literally release one hydrogen atom from the surface, leaving a dangling bond. And that's very reactive. And to that reactive dangling bond, we bring in phosphine gas, which will only stick to that dangling bond and nowhere else on the surface. And it's in such a way that we can bring that phosphorus and put it exactly in the one atomic lattice spacing of where we want it. And then once we've done that, we encapsulate with silicon over the top of it. And by encapsulating with silicon, we surround it with silicon atoms. So it's sitting one phosphorus atom, silicon all the way around it. It's a nice clean environment for that phosphorus atom. So here, this is our scanning tunneling microscope on the right-hand side here, and this is connected under ultra-high vacuum with a piece of stainless steel to a molecular beam epitaxy system. So once we've done the atomic manipulation next door, we bring it through the stainless steel tube to our crystal growth system. And in here we have sources basically of silicon and germanium, which are basically lumps of silicon and lumps of germanium that are heated up with an electron beam, and they evaporate inside this ultra-high vacuum chamber. And ideally what we want in this crystal growth system is for the pressure to be as low as possible. So when we heat the silicon up, the only thing that's coming towards our surface is silicon, nothing else. We don't want any impurities. And the way that we do that is we have this thin skin inside the UHV system which goes up to a big tube that's hooked up to a liquid nitrogen tank. So we literally run liquid nitrogen through here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that's really, really cold. So any other atoms that are floating around in that vacuum system stick to the walls and they don't go into the crystal. So the pressure gets really, really low. And we also have shutters on each of these controllers here that sit across the silicon cell. And we can open the shutter for very short periods of time and literally grow one atomic layer of silicon at a time. But to get that beautiful, nice, pristine, clean vacuum, we also have to have pumps. And those pumps are vibrating. You can hear it's quite noisy in here. And those pumps allow you to pull out all the molecules in there that you don't want before you put your silicon growth. And as a consequence, the whole system is literally vibrating in this room. And we've designed it so that it actually sits on a concrete block that goes 10 meters into the ground on a completely separate board to the rest of the lab. So the vibrations are taken out of the building into the sand. And then the STM sits next door on the other foundations of the building, so the vibration is completely isolated between the two. I guess it's very few people have, well, actually several groups have tried to connect these two technologies before, and they found that the vibrations from the crystal growth side actually destroyed the imaging that you would get with the STM. So it's actually very difficult to bring those two technologies together. So we actually literally had to work with lots of engineers with both of the companies and independent acoustic engineers to bring the two technologies together. It's a very expensive system. It cost about $3 million. It was one of those turning points, certainly in my career, because if they didn't come together and work, that probably would have been the end of me. And it took about 18 months to a year, 2 years, to get the system online. But when we finally designed it, we got it here and it worked beautifully, and actually worked about a factor of 6 better than we predicted. So we built the whole crystal structure inside the vacuum, one atomic layer by a time. And then at the end we take it out, and then we have to find it. And that was one of the first challenges we had, was how do we find that single phosphorus atom? And what we've done is, over the last 5 to 10 years, is we've developed techniques and patented them. We're making markers in the surface that are visible all the way through when you put it in vacuum and when you take it out, and making sure that phosphorus atom is registered with respect to that marker. But how do you connect to the outside world? The connections that you've got to make have got to be as small as you can make them, so that when you literally try and address that atom, you're just addressing that atom and not all the atoms around it. So when you take it out, you can see the marker. You put down your metal electrodes on the surface that control the spin states and the electron states of the phosphorus atoms, and then you apply voltages to those on the surface. So at the end of the day, you'd have a device you can hold in your hand, so it's a real device. It's not working inside the vacuum system but outside. And that's obviously fundamentally important to having some kind of device where you really control it in terms of temperature and magnetic field.
The quantum state of the phosphorus atom, now locked in its silicon cage, is fragile. To detect its spin and then control it requires extraordinary finesse. The smallest outside interference could affect it, so any manipulation of spin is at very low temperatures.
So you need everything to be cold so you can isolate the quantum system and separate the energy levels out. So we're using phosphorus because it has one extra electron than the silicon atoms in the crystal that's around it. And we actually use that electron spin as the source of the information holder. So that's our qubit, the electron spin on the phosphorus atom.
What we're looking at here is a single electron site where we're first emptying an electron. That's what we're doing over here. In the second step, we load one single electron, and in the third step, the readout step, we look whether it's spin up or spin down. So what we see here is first a spin up electron tunneling in, and then after that a spin down electron tunneling back out again. So that's our detection of a single electron spin. To me as a physicist, this is actually the most amazing thing that I've done in my scientific career, to be able to observe something that I would never be able to see with the bare eye, and still we get it visible with these extremely sensitive measurements, to look at one single electron spin instead of things that you can touch with your bare hands. It's been such a long project that it was amazing. Once we first saw this clear signal, this bulletproof signature that we actually have one electron spin, it's amazing. And we were, yeah, well, nearly dancing in the lab, but not really that bad, but we might have been.
You know, they're such a fragile thing, you know, but actually we measure them every day, and every day I come in, we look at the devices that we make, and I look at the images and I go, wow, that's beautiful. And it never ceases to amaze me. It really doesn't. And every day, I'll be honest with you, every day, even though we've now studied the system for a number of years, every day there is something on that surface, an interaction that's occurring that I don't understand. And like, where did that come from? What's that from? And so it's always a surprise. It's never boring. And I mean, to be honest, every device that we make in itself, you never know with the device how it's going to work. Because it's so much smaller than any other device that can be made, the way that it behaves is completely non-intuitive. And all the models that you use normally to model a classical device, which fit nicely and explain everything, they don't work in the quantum world. So even to the point when we made very recently our first real single atom device, and then we started saying, well, what happens if we bring another atom in? What will it do? And it was such a simple question, 2 atoms. Well, it can't change things that much, but actually it changes things phenomenally. And then we realized if we had a 5-atom device, already with our system, 5 atoms is too difficult for us to understand and write equations down that can solve it. So I'm realizing that we have the ability to control right at that fundamental level. It means that we actually can start to understand what happens as you bring them in one by one, what you do when you place them, and really that's the fundamentals almost of nature, of how chemistry works, how biology works, you know? So it's really incredible.
Hi, welcome to the Robotics Lab at the School of Computer Science and Engineering. I'm Raymond Shea, Robotics PhD student. A day in the life of such a student and the robot he is working on is surprising, enlightening, and sometimes extremely frustrating. This is our latest project. It's a rescue robot. The team has been working on it for the last few years. Our aim is to create a robot that can be used for search and rescue. It will be able to enter a disaster site, say after an earthquake or landslide, search for survivors and map the site for the human rescuers to follow. One of the biggest challenges is teaching it to drive itself autonomously over rough terrain. So we have created this variable obstacle course in the lab where the robot can be tested over a wide range of scenarios. And sometimes we take the robot out around the university grounds and test it on different textures and environments. Essentially, we're teaching it to think for itself. One way we do this is by recording everything that a human does and sees when operating the robot with a joystick. We then use this information to teach the robot how the human thinks when doing this task. So in essence, the robot learns to operate autonomously. Without human assistance. The robot sees its world with cameras and other sensors and uses what it has learned to mount the search and rescue. As with all research, things don't always go to plan. Today we're troubleshooting a communications problem with the robot. Looks like we've got a bit of a configuration problem in a few places, so we're just having a look and seeing what we can do about it. The pressure is on, because in a couple of months we are taking the robot to Austria to compete against other teams from around the world in the International RoboCup Rescue Robot League competition. We hope that our team will have achieved the best technological innovations in decision making and learning.